Hi all. This week we continue our discussion of conflict in communities and public life by looking at public dialogue. Now, dialogue in some ways is similar to deliberation, so you'll see some overlap in the material from this module and the previous one. So both dialogue, public dialogue, and deliberation can be understood as communication processes used in public life to help groups and communities address difficult, divisive issues. They're often held as these specifically designed interactions or events where people come together to talk about some issue of public concern, right? So where deliberation focuses more on analyzing information, weighing options and making decisions, dialogue looks at and helps people build deeper understanding and collective sense of appreciation and fosters a sense of connection between people. So a lot of my own research and community engagement work involves facilitating public dialogue. So I think dialogue is an important extension of what we've learned so far about communication and social conflict. So part of what you'll see in our readings for this week are in this module are kind of definitions of dialogue and ways that it's used in sort of public processes and ways that kind of communication happens during these dialogue events. So dialogue features things like encouraging people to be genuine, bring their sort of full self to the experience, share their stories, and sort of be present. It also encourages people to be open to listening and learning and trying to understand people who come from different experiences, backgrounds, worldviews, ideologies, etc. Sometimes dialogue is explicitly done to bring together different cultural groups from different cultural backgrounds to build better understanding and appreciation between these groups. Other times it could be more around an issue, and still the idea is for people to share their stories, to hear each other's stories, and to try to build a better sense of connection. Dialogue in the way that it happens in groups and communities is usually in itself not decision oriented, which is what makes it different from kind of deliberation, although it is also a facilitated small group kind of interaction. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One example comes from an organization called Essential Partners that has been around for decades in the Boston area, and they hold dialogues typically between groups that hold really distinct and opposing views about something. So they might work with these groups to bring them, do a lot of work beforehand and then bring them together to have like a structured, reflective dialogue to try to better understand each other's perspectives and views. So, for example, they hold conversations on guns, and you think about the conflict framing there. The framing is really important. They don't want to frame it as gun rights or gun control because that is coming as a frame from one of the sort of opposing sides. So they would bring together these people who are advocates on either side and explicitly say, we're not trying to persuade anyone, we're not trying to make a decision, we're just trying to build better understanding because we think with better understanding we can live together in this world a little easier. Sometimes there are also, Essential Partners would also do sort of intercultural dialogues that are designed to help people learn about each other. So these events foreground personal storytelling and encourage generative questions about values and experiences. So some of the questions that might be asked are things like, what is at the heart of the matter to you? What really matters for this issue? What are experiences that you've had that shape your view on this issue? What's a misperception of your group from somebody else that you would like to correct? What questions do you have about the other side that you haven't really been able to ask or have answered? Tell us about a time in your life when you found strength or internal resources to overcome some challenge. How can you pull on those strengths and resources now in the midst of a new challenge? So questions like this, they're very appreciative, very opening, right, and open-ended. Another example, dialogue can sometimes be part of a longer community change process. So in a different organization and many sort of social advocacy sorts of organizations will hold dialogue as part of a longer process toward advocacy and social change. So for example, you might use listening circles or some other approach to bring people in a community together to really hear their experiences and get a good understanding of what's going on. And then the next stage might be going beyond the dialogue to other kinds of work, like drafting policy or proposing ideas or creating new organizations or taking action. So in all of this, there's a really crucial need for people to design and facilitate the dialogues. As you might expect, being a facilitator in these kinds of dialogic meetings is incredibly important, right? And has a set of challenges. Again, similar to being a mediator or kind of mediating somebody else's conflict or being kind of a third party, right? The facilitator is really focused on process and helps the group follow the process to meet its goals. So facilitators make decisions about how to design the process, like who should be invited, how are we going to frame the topic to in the invitation that it honors different views, what kind of communication agreements will we have, where should we hold the conversation, make it possible for people to be there, how long will the session be, what will the room look like, and sometimes there's like before meeting, like before the dialogue, there's sort of pre-meeting kind of work that happens with the different people to help them understand what they're being asked to participate in and why. And then when the meeting actually begins, facilitators guide the process. So it's not enough just to sort of list communication agreements, right? You have to actually talk through them, work through questions and concerns people might have about them, and then use them in the process. So if people are violating some of the communication agreements, like only one person talks at a time, or speak without blame, where we're not judging other people, we're trying to be inclusive. If you see people violating those, it's a reminder, like, remember these were our agreements, to try to shape what happens in the process. And there are also decisions about what this interaction structure should look like. So sometimes it's having everyone sit in a circle and we all go around, each person gets a turn to talk. Other times there's something like a storytelling process, or people bring an object to share, or it's called a World Cafe, or kind of open space, or pro-action cafe, all these different designs that people can use to help like move people from small groups to small groups and get them involved in these dialogues with other people. And there's also the process of facilitation of keeping track of time and sort of posing questions, asking follow-ups, and encouraging the kind of reflection that you want in a dialogue. Finally, facilitators have to capture information from the group in some way. And I don't mean capture like, I've got it, but like, taking notes. Sometimes there's graphic facilitation, which is really interesting, where somebody who is very artistic will be like drawing this big picture on the wall that tries to capture what's going on in the conversation. And you can involve participants in creating a record of their own conversation, like writing on little sticky notes, or kind of writing on paper on the tables and then sharing things, reviewing the comments, etc. So it's this process of kind of structuring the meeting to be dialogic, facilitating the interaction, and then sharing what was learned at the end. So dialogue is often used as a way to help people get through intractable conflicts and promote reconciliation and forgiveness for people who've faced vast moral differences and lived in deeply divisive conflict situations. People who learn to facilitate dialogue can be more effective conflict mediators and can serve as leaders in community and organizational change efforts. So part of why I want us to talk about dialogue this week is to help you make those personal connections of how being a dialogic facilitator could be useful for you in conflict situations that you might face. So although dialogue isn't always centered around a specific conflict, it is focused on understanding and honoring difference. And I hope that by learning about dialogue and seeing these examples of facilitation in this module, you can find ways to take some aspects of dialogue into your own communities and organizations. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for engaging with this material. I look forward to reading your reflections.